So, I looked back on Insight. Well, actually, before I start, I should go ahead and say I may cough a little bit. I may sound kind of scratchy because I'm indoors and stuff with indoor air quality. So there's that. But to get to the point, I looked back on Insight and I realized that I forgot to mention this one thing. This goes back to the whole thing with Americans pretending that youth homelessness doesn't exist, and especially the side with Southern people and quote-unquote black people especially. And I've mentioned this before with how, like, another reason that they're automatically going to feel some type of way about street kids and assume a lot of things about you being quote-unquote grown and hiding from somebody, or maybe even them just assuming that you're way older than you actually are, is because so many they like not fall victim, they fall in line really with their Jezebelic mom to the point where they never leave their abusive family system, and they're 40 still being told whether they can use the microwave, what they can eat for dinner, not being allowed to get a job by their Jezebelic mom, and they've never left home and don't go anywhere, don't know jack about jack. So when they see street kids, they automatically assume that you have to be way older than you actually are. Or, of course, the usual thing that people are going to say, homeless youth, they're just runaways and kicked out, so just make them go back home. As a dude talked about who works with homeless youth. And so, anywho, this kind of goes into that. That's the point I was getting at. So, something that I may have mentioned in this video, or the video where I talked about the situation with this boy, is that he was homeless and had been for a little while. I mean, realistically, when you grow up in situations like this, you are hidden homeless for numerous reasons. But he had been homeless for some months before he had went to the Job Corps Center because his mom had moved and wouldn't tell him where she moved to, and there was a lot of stuff with that I really don't even remember. And he had been staying in, like, abandoned mansions and stuff like that. And so I remember there was something he had to, like, sign up for, but he had to put an address for in case, I think it was for the laptop. So just in case, like, you break the laptop and they want to bill you, they want to know your address. And the staff were, of course, mostly, if not all, quote-unquote black people, and mostly women. And so he was like, oh, wait a minute, no, hold up. They were like, you have to put your address on this paper to be able to get one of the laptops. And he was like, but I don't have an address. And they were like, well, what do you mean you don't have an address? Because, of course, just the idea that homeless youth doesn't exist. And that's one of the funny things about quote-unquote programs like that, is that they claim that, like, they also catered to homeless youth, but they really don't, because people aren't expecting youth to be homeless, and that still leads to there being a lot of issues when a youth is homeless, like full-blown homeless, because it still just raises a lot of questions and makes the people feel some type of way about you. But he kept saying he didn't have an address, and they just kept saying, well, what do you mean you don't have an address? Where did you come from? And yes, there was a lot of stuff with that. I don't know if he was ever able to get the laptop or not. I can't really remember, but that's not even really the point. It's just like their reaction to him and the way that they treated him and asked him a whole bunch of questions when he said that he didn't have an address. And it's like, I don't really It's just really stupid. It kind of makes me think of like some things I've signed up for in the South where like they don't really have options to choose like your living situation and stuff like that. Or they'll claim that, like it'll say something like if you don't have a home address, just put your mailing address or something like that, or just put your zip code. But then when I try to do that, it says it has to be filled in, stuff like that. Or even that thing that that screenshot that I put in that one video where like it didn't have an option for homeless, and it was like asking, do you live in a home? Are you in foster care? / a group home and stuff like that, but it didn't have like all the options it should have. And I think it's not even just because like the youth thing, but also because like, especially in the South, you're not going to be expected to be like living outside anyways. So there's that. Well, what was I about to say? Oh yeah, so I've been making my last couple videos before, but I'm just gonna call my grand disappearance, which I'm not gonna go into that much again. And so I wanted to talk about this one thing. I've talked about this before, and I have a whole video about it that I put in the description. I think like I have the screenshot, and I'm gonna edit that in. So I talked about the boy who was being trafficked by the mafia and the U.S. military a couple times. My first video I made about it was during the abuse evidence channels, because I met him and the whole situation went down during the abuse evidence videos. And so, anywho, I saw a thumbnail and a video title that said something about a Russian sex spy. Now, realistically, it still does sound like labor trafficking in a form of sex trafficking, and what else was it? Or maybe possibly prostitution. But when I saw that, it made me think back to this boy, because for one, he was in a form of labor trafficking, SRA, of course sex trafficking. There was a lot of different types, and of course he was also forced to be a spy. But when I saw this thumbnail and video title about the Russian sex spy, it also gave me more language that I could use to describe this type of situation. So he was a sex spy, as it would be called apparently. And even that's really a sugarcoat of the horrors of the situation. But I'm sure there's many sleeper cell Russian sex spies in the U.S. That's kind of a side note. But anywho, he was used as a sex spy throughout his life, and honestly, probably even still now. I wouldn't be surprised, but it's really unfortunate. Although there was a lot of sexual abuse in his situation in general, which is really common for like these mafia type families, or really all gangs are rooted in the occult. Like, for example, people are always talking about the cartel or the supposed cartel, because there's a lot of racial stuff with that. But they're just Satanists, they're just Luciferians, they're just occultists. They're doing the same rituals, or honestly kind of somewhat less apparently, than a lot of the higher ups in the US, and even the lower level people in the US are doing. But it's like, I mean, just like with the GDs, it's obviously like a Kabbalah type thing. That's just one example. Bloods, as I've talked about before, the name is obvious because it's Bloods. It's all rooted in the occult and Freemasonry and pagan Roman Catholicism. Because all the gangs, they do voodoo and stuff. And voodoo is Catholic. It's also called Santeria, worship of the quote-unquote saints. And like the cartel people, they all do Santeria and all that stuff. And El Chapo, if that's the right one, whatever his name was, something like that. He was a well-known, high-ranking Luciferian and a warlock who supposedly was able to disappear and reappear. So there's that. But the point of me mentioning all that is that of course they're going to be doing like SA rituals on their own kids and stuff in these different little gangs and the different European mafias and mobs. And what else do I have to say about that? It even makes me think back to like how people who are brought into gangs are brought in as kids, which is the same way voodoo and all that stuff always works, really. I mean, I still have my video of the whole situation where the police tried to force me into that voodoo cult, and I know like Karina Lourdes, she talks about like her time back in Haiti and how like the gangs, they try to like, well, not the gangs, this is the same thing, so I got confused for a second, but I meant to say the warlocks. They go look for like kids who don't have parents and stuff like that, or at least I think that's what she was talking about. I know somebody's mentioned that before, but hopefully people who see this, if anyone watches this, already know that. So look for people who don't have parents and are traumatized and all that stuff, because it's easier to take them through further brainwashing when they're already like desperate and all that stuff. And so anyways, they turn the kids out, teach them to become warlocks, or like I was being told I was going to be, or was supposedly going to, thought she was going to try to force me to become a high priest, a voodoo high priest. She was like, she did a couple different things, the voodoo cult lady, but apparently like whatever Beyonce is, that's what she is, and she wanted me to become. It was something like that, but I'll put the video in the description. It's honestly kind of funny though. The police forced me into that though, because I would never agree to that or really any other let me help you lunatic situation, because it's just not worth it. But you know what, that's the funny thing, I just thought about it. I never got sick when I was at her house, because I typically get sick in all buildings, but I remember getting sick while I was there. But that's kind of irrelevant though. But anywho, to get back to the point. And then another thing that's like commonly talked about in prisons is like how the guys don't like chomos and how they re-traumatize chomos and all that stuff. But one of the things behind that is that the reason that people fall into this cycle and they end up in prison, rather for something they actually did or didn't do sometimes, or at least with, well, I'm about to make this more complicated. They're traumatized, but most of them have been SA'd before. Which is why supposedly some of them are already on the down low before they get into prison. But I've talked about plenty of times before how jail and prison is just the MK Ultra Virgo Vaso sodomy ritual fest anyways. It's literally just a sex party. But yeah, a lot of the dudes, they don't like chomos because they've been SA'd before, which is why they fall into the cycles of crime and the DL effeminate thug persona, because they've been taught that that's what you have to do to prove that you're tough and to prove that you're a man. Especially if you got SA'd by a dude And so there's that. Then the elder trafficking thing, it makes me think about the situation with Miss J, especially with the program that had like got her put in that, whatever that was, elderly group home type thing where all the SA was happening. That's what that makes me think of, although I'm not gonna lie, I did not watch that video, but just like the title made me think about that. I almost forgot about that part. But yeah, it's a really unfortunate situation. And of course, he's just been funneled back into the military. And it's still really unfortunate. I don't know what else to say about it, but he's still a kid. And that's another sad thing about it. But I mean, as I've said before, there is no such thing as a child or a childhood. But that's how the military goes as well. Although his situation is kind of different because he was born into this type of trafficking. But the reality is that, as even people like Allie Carter have talked about, the military funnels in or manipulates kids into joining, and they tell them that they're going to like make a lot of money and stuff, which none of that is true. In fact, I learned years ago that people who drive for public transportation, especially like the Greyhound, get paid the same amount or even more than people in the military. But of course, to be able to get a job in public transportation, especially with the Greyhound, you typically have to be a Freemason or Eastern Star. And I've even talked about before, even since before on the abuse evidence channels, that I learned really young, since I already knew the symbolism from the hats that the bus drivers would wear, that even school bus drivers are very often Freemasons. Because the lodges and the Catholic Church and all that, they help people get these certain jobs. And I guess they like keep the jobs open for people in their different little groups to get them. That's why you'll often notice that with religious organizations, especially with the Catholic Church, Mormon, Jehovah's Witness, what was the other thing called that Ruby Frank was, or was that a Mormon? I think that was a Mormon. Like, the religious organizations, like the churches they have, are kind of like they're kind of like LinkedIn. People go there to get help. People go there pretty much for networking, to get jobs and to do rituals to get into certain positions. But yeah, so this is gonna be one of my last few videos before my grand disappearance, as I'm calling it.